Hi there, and welcome to One Body, One Life, proudly sponsored by Jamae's Fine Foods. I'm Vicki Nguyen, and I'm on a personal mission to live to 120, and I would absolutely love to take you on this journey with me. This show is focused on longevity and understanding how we can all live longer and stronger through diet, exercise, lifestyle, nutrition, and so on. Each episode, we will uncover tips and tricks to living your healthiest and happiest life for as long as physically possible. I'll be chatting to the experts as well as people who have defied the odds and explore various treatments and modalities to help us all reach optimal wellness. So in this episode, I talk all things sleep with the wonderful sleep specialist, Dr. David Cunnington. Dr. Cunnington studied in both Australia and in the USA at Harvard Medical School, allowing him to have international qualifications in sleep medicine. He is an expert commentator for a variety of sleep disorders, including sleep apnea, narcolepsy and restless leg syndrome. Dr. Cunnington strives to educate the public on the importance of sleep health through research and advocacy. And rather than resorting to medication alone, Dr. Cunnington treats his patients through behavioural and psychological treatments. David is a co-director of Melbourne Sleep Disorders Centre. He also writes regular blogs for the Sleep Hub and has his own podcast. I'm curious to understand how one of my favourite pastimes can lead to better health and longevity. So welcome to the show, David.
Thanks a lot.
So good to see you. So I actually love sleeping. It's one of my favourite things, and it's a topic that I've wanted to explore for such a long time now, and especially now with what's happening with coronavirus around the world, and no doubt there are many listeners who are perhaps struggling with sleep and finding it really difficult right now. So tell us, what happens when you sleep? What happens to the brain during sleep?
So the brain's actually really active during sleep. So going back to the 19th century, it used to be thought that the brain was quiet because the body was still and nothing's supposed to happen at night. People thought that there was no electrical activity in the brain.
Wow.
And that's actually the basis for Freud's conflict theory, is there had to be something to generate those electrical signals that therefore gave dreaming. So you needed this id-ego conflict. Once we could start to measure what was happening in the brain in the 1930s and then into the 1940s, we really learned that the brain's very active during sleep, and it does lots of different things and depends on which different sleep stages, what it's actually doing. But sleep's an active, restorative process. The funny thing is people still ask me, well, what's the purpose of sleep? We don't. Apart from restoration, we still don't really know the answer to that. And I love the quote from Bill Dement, one of the sort of doyens of sleep research. And he says, well, we sleep so we don't bump into things walking around at night.
I used to say to my kids it was a time for their bodies to grow. During the sleep is when they grow. So talk to us about the stages of sleep.
So artificially sleep's divided up into two main categories: REM sleep, so rapid eye movement sleep.
Yes, which you can actually feel, can't you?
Not necessarily.
No?
Let me
Okay.
come back to that.
Okay.
And non-REM sleep, so
Okay.
non-rapid eye movement sleep. And then within non-REM, we divided into three, so N1, N2, N3. What we call N3 now, we used to call slow wave sleep or delta sleep, so it's now in N3. And the reason I say somewhat artificially divided into that is that categorisation of REM and non-REM was really decided upon and finalised in 1968 at a consensus committee. So some old bloke sitting around a table decided that's how we're going to divide this thing up.
Okay.
It hasn't changed since.
Oh, there you go.
And really what it is, if we look at these, it's based on electrical signals from the brain. There's actually many, many different frequencies and all different bits of the brain doing all different things.
Right.
And research now is you can record 256 different channels of electrodes from regionally across the brain and show that it's all different. We still only categorise it into those four main categories.
Interesting.
And the reason I talk about, you saying you can feel REM is when people think about sleep, they sometimes they sort of go more on, this is how it feels to me, and I think REM should feel this way, therefore that's what I'm experiencing. But in actual fact, if you think of REM as a mixture of electrical frequencies in the brain, how on earth could you feel that?
Yeah, right.
It's totally disconnected.
Yes, fair
Whereas
enough.
if people say, what's your problem with sleep? Well, I'm not getting enough REM. I've really got to ask them, what do you mean by that? And for one person, it'll be, well, I don't dream. And another person, it'll be, well, I'm too still. And everyone's got their own interpretations. I really think of sleep as having a number of different ways you can look at it.
Okay.
So one way is the experience. So that's the sleeper. How does it feel to them? Another way to look at it is the observer. the bed partner, for example. What does it look like to them? And it's often different because the sleeper will, or the person experiencing will say, well, I was awake. And the partner will say, no, you weren't. You were asleep because you were snoring. And so that's a demonstration where they don't line up. A third way of looking at it is think of physiology. So what's actually happening at a biological level.
Right.
So that's more the EEG type of definition. And then yet another way of looking at it is of the functional outcome. So what's the outcome from sleep? Because arguably, if someone's functioning well during the day, got good physical and mental health, who cares how it feels, what it looks like, or what the EEG shows?
Okay.
Because they may actually be totally irrelevant if somebody's functioning well. But very often people who come to see me in my role as a medical specialist are very hung up about the how it feels, but lose track of the sight that they've actually got good physical and mental health.
But does it catch up with them eventually? That if they're feeling that they're not sleeping that well, but even though they've got the energy to function throughout the day?
So it depends. So it depends on how they feel like they're not sleeping well. Because that's also one of the funny things about sleep is a lot of our beliefs about sleep are more societal and cultural beliefs. So we have this belief that we should sleep for 8 hours. It should be a continuous experience. We shouldn't be aware of things. Bad things shouldn't happen. That's all rubbish.
Okay.
Everyone sleeps for variable amounts of time.
Yes.
There's about 30% of a normal night's usually characterised by semi-awareness of things around us. We do move during sleep. Sleep's not a stable thing. It's something that varies across the night. So we have all these beliefs about sleep.
Okay.
And often people will feel like their sleep's not good. They're not satisfied with their sleep, for example. But it's more that the sleep they're experiencing doesn't meet the belief or the expectation they have as to what sleep should be. And we often simplify that, unfortunately, in this day and age. There's lots of messages about sleep in the community, and often it's a little bit oversimplified, where it's got to be, you need 8 hours or there'll be these bad consequences. It must be like this. If it's not like that, you're going to suffer
Which is not the case, you're saying.
Which is actually not necessarily the case.
So is REM the most important part of sleep?
No.
No.
And you could ask me that question for any stage of sleep.
Okay.
Really, what's important for sleep, again, if we break it down in those definitions, and if I think of a physiological definition, it's having the right mix of all those sleep stages and them occurring in the right sequence.
Okay.
So if I'm looking at a sleep study and I look at it sort of screen after screen or page after page, it should unfold like a story.
Okay.
I should be able to tell what's coming next based on what's gone before.
Yeah, right.
It evolves. It sort of unfolds across the night. It's not something where you just add them up at the end and you've got enough in each bin, everything's good.
Yeah.
It's actually got to follow a particular sequence.
Okay.
So that's what's good quality sleep.
Excellent.
It's so hard to then distill down into, well, my Fitbit says I had 30% light and 70% deep, therefore is that good? Where's the story?
Yes.
Is it really in the right sequence?
Yeah,
and
right.
What's
it's
actually
got to flow
happening?
nicely.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I sleep amazingly well. I've always slept pretty well, but I don't move either. I breathe deeply and I wake up pretty much in the same position that I've fallen asleep in, which is great. But my husband often comments on how deeply and how well I sleep. But I actually put it down to my breathing. I think my breath work that I did with yoga teaching for all those years actually helped me and allows me to sleep peacefully, and I feel always fresh when I wake up. So tell us what hormones are released during sleep?
So it varies in different stages of life. So, your story, you told your kids you grow at night. There's certainly truth to the fact that growth hormone is secreted at night. So one of the hormones that is a driver for growth. And so, yes, that's part of that data that suggests that at certain stages in life, particularly adolescence, if people aren't getting adequate sleep or sleep disrupted, you'll alter their growth hormone levels. Now, we don't have great data showing that means they're going to be shorter or not develop, but we can certainly measure growth hormone as something that's secreted at night. And again, don't think of it so much as sleep in isolation. And this is also a common theme that comes up when people come and see me in my practice, is they almost ignore what happens during their waking hours and are very focused on what happens just during sleep.
Right.
Whereas, in fact, we're biological beings that run 24/7. And there's a yin and a yang, there's an ebb and a flow, there's ups and downs, and things alter and vary across that 24-hour period. And so it's not as if you just don't get the right bit of sleep at the right time, then this won't happen.
Yeah.
Because what happens in sleep often is very dependent on what happens during the day.
Yes.
You're not paying attention to self-care, so you don't have good stress management strategies. You're not
Yes.
eating well. You're not socially engaged. Not have good self-compassion. All of these
Exactly.
things can then actually impact on sleep.
Totally.
And someone ends up in my office going, I've got this sleep problem. And I'm sitting across the desk going, you know what? Your life's in the toilet.
Yes.
You've really got some other more existential problems.
It's happening, yeah.
They go, no, just fix my sleep and my
Yes.
life will be okay.
Well, I love the fact that you're quite holistic in your approach and you look at the big picture because, like you said, it's all of these factors that come into play when you're thinking, when you're looking at sleep quality and how a person feels. So talk to me about, like, a lot of people say they love waking up naturally without an alarm. Are there benefits to that? And is it because you're not breaking the sleep? It's just like you're waking up naturally when your body's ready. Is that why people like it so much?
It's variable.
Yeah.
So yes, if we just sleep ad lib, so
Yes.
let ourselves wake up when we're ready to wake up, usually we'll wake up at the end of a cycle of sleep, and that's a natural time when we'll feel like we're ready to go. So have a bit more of that sensation of, I'm
Okay.
awake, right.
Good to go.
Let's get into the day. Whereas if it's, okay, I have a hard start at 7 a.m.
Yes.
No matter what, 7 a.m.'s my time.
Yes.
Some days it may be close to the end of a sleep cycle and you're like, yeah, okay, I can do this. And other days you may be mid-cycle of sleep and you're like, whoa,
Yes.
that's 7 o'clock thing again. Poor, that's tough.
Yeah, well, I was
today.
up this morning at 4 o'clock because I had to take my intern to the airport for a 5 o'clock flight, and I had to go and pick her up. And it was 4 a.m. And usually I've caught lots of international flights before. It's super ridiculous early times, but I felt dizzy. And I don't know if it was a combination of getting up too quick or just it took me a while to actually come good and feel safe enough to drive.
Right.
To
But
be
that's a
honest.
nice demonstration of one of the other processes that's involved in sleep,
Yes.
which is your internal body clock.
Right.
And so if we get up 3 hours, for example, before our natural arising time,
Yes.
think of the body clock as expecting us to be lying flat
Yes.
in the dark and still. And so our blood pressure regulation is going to be not expecting us to be upright.
Exactly.
So we'll get a sense of, whoa.
Yeah, that's how I
I'm
felt.
really right here. I'm not quite orientated. Where your sleep story, that evolving story across the night is it's going to be in the type of sleep that has some inertia associated with it.
Yeah, right.
Because with the body and brain aren't expecting to wake up for a couple of hours yet.
Yes.
So they haven't started to shut
Mature.
down those sleep processes.
Yeah.
And if you get woken at that time, it's just like, whew,
Shock.
I'm heavy-headed. This is really going to take ages to
Yeah,
get going.
I'm good, yeah.
And then as your circadian rhythm comes to the phase where your core body temperature starts to gradually increase, get ready for the day, that's when you
Yes.
start to feel the fog lift and feel like,
can do
now
this.
I'm on board. Yeah,
Yes.
now I can do this.
Well, that's exactly how my experience was this morning. So tell us about, like you said earlier, there's, people think that 8 hours of sleep is the amount, like the right amount of time that we should be getting. But you were saying before it's completely individual. And so what's your take on that? Like, and also does that change the number of hours or, as we age, does that requirement change? Do we need less?
Yeah, absolutely. So sleep evolves across life. So it's longer in some phases of life, so adolescence and our early adult life, for example, shorter in other phases, such as in older age. For people of working age, so think of that as sort of 20-ish to 65-ish, it stays fairly stable.
Okay.
Now, if you look at the population averages in Australia, so population average is 7 hours and 20 minutes of sleep
There you
across the
go.
Australian population.
Okay.
But that's the average. Now, what an
Right.
average hides is the upper and lower sort of borders of that. Now, in a research sense, we do have some evidence that people who habitually get less than 5 hours of sleep per night have some health consequences
Yes.
associated with that. But funnily enough, people who sleep for more than 9 hours per night also have some health consequences associated with it, not caused by it.
Yes.
And
Associated.
so we're not sure whether it's the short sleep and the long sleep is that they're a marker that someone's got some other health conditions.
Yes, that makes
and
sense.
sleep's the measurable thing.
Yes.
But there's some other health things that are impacting on that.
Interesting.
Or whether it's the sleep itself or whether there's an interaction of those two things.
Yeah, right.
So generally we like to think of that upper and lower boundary as 5 to 9 hours, but that's pretty broad. So you, in a working sense, I really much prefer something like 7 to 9 hours should
Okay.
be the target for
Number.
people.
Yeah.
But there are a subset of people who don't need 7 hours of sleep and function well.
Fine. Yeah.
And in today's society, they wear that like a badge of honour.
Yeah,
It's,
right,
It's, it's a
Only need 4
characteristic.
hours.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
you see our politicians, the ones who do get away or can get away with not sleeping that much, which isn't all of them by any stretch, they brag about it.
Yes.
And you see images of them, John Howard out pumping the pavement in the morning, as a positive trait that the Australian public likes. I want to see more images of our politicians napping in their pyjamas, prioritising sleep, not bragging about debating bills at 2 a.m. in the morning when their brains are going to be like you were at 4 a.m. this morning. I don't want important decisions made when they're foggy and sleep deprived.
Yeah, right.
I want sleep to be a priority and that for really to be a positive trait.
Absolutely. You need to start a movement, Dr. David. It's just it's one of those things, because you're right. People pride themselves on being busy, not sleeping much. They love this, on the go, and so they're so caught up in doing that they forget about just being and nurturing themselves, don't they?
Absolutely.
So that's interesting. So talk to us about the type of disorders that you treat. I know obviously insomnia is a very common one. What else do you treat?
So I'll put it in a couple of categories.
Yep.
So think of different categories. So one category is the can't sleep.
Okay.
So that's the insomnia category.
Yes.
Can't get to sleep, can't stay asleep, waking too early
Yes.
in the morning. Another category is the too sleepy.
Oh,
Even if I'm getting enough sleep,
Yeah.
I'm sleepy during the day.
Yeah, right.
So that's the narcolepsy, people with fatigue syndromes,
Yes.
people with other medical things that make them sleepy during the day. There's the body clock disorders, so people who can sleep but not at the time they need to for social reasons, be it for shift work or be it that for some reason their own internal body clock's drifted out to a different time. So common in adolescence, but also common with mental health problems as well.
Of course, yeah.
Think of the strange things happening during sleep as another group.
Right.
So that's the parasomnias.
Oh, wow.
So sleepwalking, sleep talking, night terrors, acting out dreams, all of those
Interesting.
sort of behaviours. And then a subgroup of those is the movement disorders. So that's restless legs, people who kick, jump, do other things during sleep. And then there's the breathing disorders during sleep. So snoring, sleep apnea, trouble with breathing during sleep. So you've got those sort of major clusters of disorders. And then you have you sort of worked down from there. There's about 80 odd sleep disorders underneath those sort of cluster headings.
Interesting. And is there a commonality? Like, is there something that you go, okay, so it doesn't matter what sleep condition they've got, it's a lifestyle thing or it's a mind, like there's something psychological that's unsettled in the mind? Is there anything common?
There's a couple, but not that goes across everything.
Okay.
So there'll be things that occur within a cluster.
Yes.
So within the insomnia cluster, for example, so trouble getting to sleep, staying asleep, waking early. Absolutely, there are people who have insomnia for purely biological reasons.
Okay.
Medical condition, medication, that type of thing.
Yeah, right.
But a common thing that goes across a lot of people with insomnia in today's modern society is busy brain, difficulty switching off.
Totally.
Not appreciating the relationship between I can't just go flat stick for 16 hours and then expect to totally stop for 8 hours.
Exactly.
Because we're not robots, we're not machines where we flick a switch and turn off. And they're going, being a busy bee for 16 hours means you're going to be a busy bee for 8 hours at night as well.
Yeah, right.
So busy bees, if they want to sleep well, need to learn how to not be a busy bee at times during the day and be comfortable not being a busy bee at times during the day, which is often the hardest bit, being comfortable sitting still doing nothing, to be able to at night time be comfortable being still and doing nothing.
Interesting.
Because if you're not comfortable being still doing nothing during the day, there's no way you're going to be able to do that at night.
That's great. So one thing, I mean, is would you say insomnia is probably the most common condition that you treat?
So I've got a particular interest in insomnia, so there's a bias in that.
Fair enough.
So for me, yes, I do see that. But it is the most common sleep disorder in the community. So 1 in 6 adults in Australia, US, most Western countries have insomnia even if they've managed lifestyle factors and other factors.
Okay.
So it is a really common thing.
And tell us about, I mean, you're like I said earlier, you're quite holistic and you don't just look at prescribing pills to patients, but you take quite a unique approach. So tell us about how you would treat your patients.
So there's some of the lifestyle stuff we've been talking about. You can tell from the way I've been talking that I'm
Yes.
very much about what they're doing during the day, which is often a bit of a blind spot for people. And funnily enough, sometimes people will tell me what their sleep's like. I can't switch off. Takes me ages to get to sleep. After 3 or 4 hours, I'm waking and then restless for the remainder of the night. And then I say, tell me about your day. Well, I've got a busy job and I've got 3 kids and really I just flop into bed at 10 o'clock finally. And it's like, okay, your sleep's appropriate for everything else in life.
Yeah, right.
It's actually physiologically fits
Yep.
with everything. So it's not a sleep disorder.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle. It's holistic.
It's a lifestyle disorder.
Yes.
So that's part of it, is trying to not look at sleep in isolation.
Okay, love it. That's great.
And so then the next tier down for me is thinking about that sort of broader health sort of aspect. Then I'm thinking about, are people looking after those sort of core health things?
Right.
So, nutrition, physical activity, their behaviour around sleep. And when I'm thinking about sleep, I also want to understand their thinking and behaviour around sleep. Now, the reason that's important, if you think of a good sleeper, what do they do to optimise their sleep? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
How much do they think about sleep during the day?
Probably nothing.
Not at all.
Yes, that's me.
How much can you engage them in a discussion about sleep? Really not for very long.
Okay.
Because they're not interested.
Yeah, because they don't have an issue with it, right?
So I meet people socially and they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a sleep specialist. Those who don't have a sleep problem just go,
Oh, okay.
That's interesting. Whereas those who do have a sleep problem,
I'm going to pick your brain.
Oh, that's really interesting. That must be such an interesting job.
Yes.
It's just totally different.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get a sense of that, because people who are too interested in sleep, that's part of the problem.
Okay.
They're often trying too hard. They're analysing it too much. They're overthinking it.
Yeah.
And it changes the way they behave around sleep. So a lot of their behaviours are about trying to optimise sleep, which in turn means you're then going to measure the outcome. If that doesn't work, you're then going to think of what's the next thing I'm going to put into place. And you'll be reading to find the thing that you're missing, because that's the secret that's going to get you sleeping better. So I'm trying to, when I'm assessing them, get that idea about how they think and behave around sleep. And then the final thing I'm thinking of, is there a disorder of sleep? So one of those can't sleep, too sleepy, funny things in sleep, breathing disorder, movement disorder, parasomnia sort of problems that may actually be accounting for their symptoms. So I've usually tried to get an idea about their general medical health, an idea about their sort of broader wellness and lifestyle factors, an idea about their thinking and behaviour around sleep, and then some idea about may there be a sleep disorder. So that's what I'll try to do as part of that sort of clinical assessment.
Right. And what about, I think about my children as you're talking, I'm thinking about my kids. I've got a 17-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl, and we created really strong rhythms when they were little. Obviously, you bathe them and you do it you've got a nighttime routine or rhythm. And as adults, obviously, we kind of forget about ourselves. It's kind of just, we're so caught up in getting things done, and then you quickly wash your face, brush your teeth, go to bed, and it's kind of, creating rhythms I think is really healthy. But the other thing I was thinking is, I exercise a lot, and a lot of people in my circle do, but I've got a couple of people that don't, and they're the ones that struggle with sleep. So do you think it's also that the body actually needs to expend a certain amount of energy as well for you to sleep solidly?
No.
Okay. Short answer.
Yeah, you give me lots of myths to debunk here. This is really good.
Yeah.
So part of the reason I think about that,
Yeah.
if we take the analogy of elite athletes,
Yes.
for example. So I work with a number of athletes. They often have trouble sleeping.
Okay.
But what do they do all day?
All day, exercise.
They're thrashing themselves.
Yeah, right.
Exercising all day. So really I think of the exercise sleep story, particularly in modern working professionals,
Yes.
as exercise as meditation. Guilt-free, time off task where we're not being busy. We're focused on something else, giving our minds a break. So it is that, it is a form of meditation.
Interesting.
So and so people who tell me, the days I exercise are the days I sleep better.
Yes.
For me, it's not about the physical side.
Yeah, right.
It's about the mental side.
And could it be about the fact that they've released the endorphins and so hormonally? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I reckon that's a part of it too.
Yes.
Which again fits into the mental side. So it's, you know what, may not be sleeping well, but I feel okay.
Yes.
I'm good, because you've got that endorphins from the exercise. So too often people see sleep as the antidote to all ills. I'm not well, I'm frazzled, my relationship's not great, I've got work stresses. Endorphins will help that.
Yes.
Time off task
Totally.
will help that. Self-compassion will help that. Exercise will help that. Sleep may not help that per se, but people get frustrated because they're looking for sleep as the antidote.
Yes, that's interesting. And what about, tell us about CBT therapy.
So when we're managing insomnia, the main psychological therapy that we use is called cognitive behavioural therapy.
Right.
And we think, shorten that to CBT. Really what it means is what I was talking about before. So cognitive means thinking, behaviour means behaviours, what we're doing, and trying to change people's thinking and behaviour around sleep. So
Okay.
if I was really trying to summarise CBT, it's to get someone to think about sleep like a good sleeper
Yes.
and behave around sleep like a good sleeper. That's
Okay.
the overarching thing,
Yes.
what I'm trying to do. It's got components. So in technical terms, we break those components down. So one's called sleep restriction. So that's better matching how much time you spend in bed to how much sleep you're actually going to get.
Okay.
So a problem for a lot of people who aren't sleeping well is they keep maintaining their usual pattern of going to bed, or what I call their aspirational sleep time, the time they wish they could sleep.
Yes.
They might not have slept those hours for 5 years, but they're still hoping that
Yeah.
some miracle's going to happen 1,500 nights later and it's going to work tonight, and it hasn't worked the last 1,499 nights.
That would be disappointing,
Right.
wouldn't it?
Exactly. But that's we, as human beings, that's what we do.
Yes.
So sleep restriction is saying, okay, you're only sleeping 5 hours a night, so you're only going to spend 5.5 hours in bed. So really trying to reduce the amount of time awake in bed,
Yeah, right.
as well as also build up a bit of sleep debt,
Yep.
so that then people are more sleepy at
Yes.
the time they're trying to sleep. So that's one component of CBT. Next component is called stimulus control. So that's the sort of what to do when you wake up at night.
Right.
And largely the summary is stop trying to sleep. What really the instructions are, if you're awake at night, tossing, turning, frustrated, can't get back to sleep, you've got to get out of bed, or at least sit up and switch out of that mode of trying to sleep. Really just
That would be frustrating.
it's incredibly frustrating. So you need a distractor.
Yes.
So usually we'll say, well, get out of bed, go to a different room, somewhere quiet, do something non-stimulating
Yes.
until you feel sleepy, and then back
What
to
happened
bed.
to the good old counting sheep?
Right. But there is that, if people can do that and be distracted by it, rather than going 1, 2, bloody hell, I'm up to 10 and I'm still not asleep. Now it's 20, I must be having a really bad night. And so if you can be,
It's the approach.
you
and
need
the
to be,
mindset.
right, you need
Yeah.
to be able to be distracted
Yeah,
by it.
understand. That's
So
interesting.
that's the stimulus control.
Yes.
Next component's relaxation, which is developing a relaxation
Nice.
skill. Because it's not uncommon for me to see people with insomnia or stress-related sleep problems, and I say, okay, what's your go-to thing? You notice you're getting a bit stressed and you're not sleeping well. What do? I don't really have a thing that I do. So trying to get people to develop a thing
That's nice.
that's their relaxation.
So could it be something like
strategy.
listening to a meditation CD or?
Absolutely. Whatever their thing
Yes, is.
is.
Yeah, okay.
Something that allows them to feel calm and feel relaxed, that they can practice during the day, so that then if they're awake and frustrated at night, they could redo that same thing. But the key is practicing it during the day, so you've got some confidence in it.
Yes.
You know what? If I'm feeling tense, I do this thing. The consequence is I actually feel calm. I can take that classically conditioned response
Yep.
and then bring that
Into nighttime.
to nighttime.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, the fourth thing is cognitive therapy. So that's changing people's thinking and beliefs
Okay.
around sleep.
Yep.
Now, we all have beliefs around sleep, but it's pretty, once you sort of get your ear in for it, you can hear when people have unrealistic beliefs around sleep. For example, if I don't get 8 hours of sleep, I won't be able to perform my tasks tomorrow. Well, guess what? The last 1,499 nights, you haven't had 8 hours of sleep, and you've still raised your children, and you're working
Yes.
full time, and
Yeah.
you're gainfully employed and haven't been disciplined in the workplace. And so is that really true? Or, I have no ability to control my sleep,
Yeah.
for example.
Okay.
When in actual fact, you know what? There are actually a number of different things we can do to control sleep. We can manipulate the timing. We can determine how sleep deprived we are by
Yes.
determining when we go to bed.
Okay.
So there's a number of things we can control. So really trying to sense those beliefs around sleep, and most of the time chipping away at them.
Yeah.
Well, people say, I've never been a good sleeper. I'm a poor sleeper. I'm a shocking sleeper. Really? Well, you're not going to sleep well if that's your core belief.
Yes.
That you're a shocking sleeper.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the cognitive therapy.
Yes.
That's a bit hard
Powerful.
sometimes. So it's the most powerful strategy for long-term results.
Yes.
So the sleep restriction, stimulus control, they get me good short-term results, really sort of bully sleep into line in the short term. But the thing that conveys the long-term results is changing that thinking
Cognitive, yeah.
around sleep,
Absolutely.
the cognitive component.
Makes
then
sense.
the fifth component is sleep hygiene.
Hygiene, did you say?
Hygiene. So
Tell
that's
us
the
about that.
rules
Okay.
around sleep. Don't drink alcohol after this time. Don't have big meals. Don't exercise after a certain amount of time. Don't drink caffeine too late. In essence, there's never been a research study that's showing those rules alone
Yeah.
work.
Right.
But if you look in the public space about how to sleep well. It's all articles about rules, all these sleep hygiene rules.
Yeah, right.
7 ways to sleep well tonight.
Yep.
It'll be cherry-picked 7 of these sleep hygiene
Yeah,
sort
right.
of pick list
Don't have coffee after
things.
3 o'clock or something like that.
Right, exactly. So if you think of the sort of person who's at the higher risk of getting insomnia in today's society, so someone who's attention to detail, they're busy, working professional, you give them a whole stack of rules to follow. Do you think that's going to help them feel more relaxed?
No, definitely not.
Right, exactly. So they're trying to ace their sleep hygiene exam. They're trying to get the gold star and be the best performer on sleep hygiene and bring the chart back to me and go, see, I've done
All
everything.
this,
I've been doing all these things. Going, yeah, that's the problem.
Yes.
You're doing all these things is
Exactly.
the problem.
Bit of chill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the sleep hygiene, it's almost for people who are in the pre-healthcare engagement space.
Okay.
So think of that who's someone who's doing it all wrong
Yes.
around
yes.
sleep. I call it disrespectful.
Okay.
They're disrespectful of sleep.
Yeah.
All you need to do is just don't be disrespectful. That's enough from a sleep hygiene point of view.
Perspective, yeah.
Well, you've got to score 50% on your sleep hygiene exam, not 90% on your sleep hygiene exam. So don't overly focus on the sleep hygiene. And that's important because sometimes when I see health professionals who aren't specialists in the sleep area, the advice they're giving out is sleep hygiene. And because they're not as familiar with those other 4 components of the CBT.
Exactly, yeah.
And so
Makes sense.
the person who's already feeling a bit anxious and already read the listicles of the 7 things to do to sleep well gets another 3 things to do from the health professional, and now they've got 10 things to do and they're a bit more anxious. And, and so we just as health professionals need to make sure people are not disrespectful of sleep but not push the sleep hygiene too much.
Interesting. Amazing. And what about, obviously sleeping pills I'm pretty sure you can buy them over the counter, can't you?
Some.
So
okay. Antihistamines you can buy over the counter are commonly used by people.
Talk to us about those because I travel a lot, as I mentioned earlier, and I have only ever used melatonin tablets once to help me sleep. But tell us about sleeping pills and, how they affect the sleep patterns and long-term, side effects of those.
So sleeping pills absolutely have a role in managing sleep, but they're not for everyone.
Okay.
And for me, the 2 sort of key roles for them are in people who've got acute, think of that as, quite distressing, short-term sleep problems. So there's a short-term situation that's causing someone a great deal of distress and they're not sleeping well and it's severely impacting on their mental health and daytime functioning.
Yes, okay,
So there's a good rationale for a short-term use of medication whilst that situation passes.
Okay.
And you're waiting for that to sort of
understand
to move on.
So someone's going through a very stressful time.
Right. So that's it. The other situation is, although I've talked about CBT and I'm very proactive with CBT, it doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
So there are some people who, despite their best efforts, find it challenging and can't quite get their heads around that way of reconceptualising sleep. The more common thing, though, is people have got real underlying medical or mental health issues that means that sleep, it's going to not be able to work well enough by itself.
Yes.
So they may be doing all the right things around sleep, they may be thinking, behaving okay around sleep, but because of their persistent pain, their long-standing depression, their underlying anxiety, their thyroid dysfunction, whatever, sleep's still not working well enough. And so there's a role in those people for medications.
Yes.
So in those 2 situations. Now, most people, fortunately, aren't in those situations, so we can manage without medication. And so the problem with medications, if they're used too liberally or for people who, I want the short-term solution, just give me the medication, is you've got to think about what is it you're after. Because most of the sleep medications will give time of unawareness, but they don't actually improve sleep quality and don't maintain that normal biological pattern, the sleep story that I talked about of the EEG unfolding across the night. And so people, that's where a lot of the work we do is resetting expectation. People are chasing the wrong thing. They're chasing, I want unawareness.
Yes.
Because I equate that with sleep.
Rest. Yeah.
Yeah, with rest, right?
Yeah.
Because I need respite from my day, which is painful and, I'm uncomfortable or there's, certainly in our current situation, there are uncomfortable things about our day and things that are difficult to face. So I want to just check out from that
Understand.
by having a period of unawareness.
Yes.
That's not actually sleep.
No.
It's sedation.
Yes.
It's checking
That's
out.
like-
So
yeah.
if people are looking to a sleeping pill to give them minutes of unawareness as a way
Yes.
of checking out from reality, that's where we run into problems.
Okay.
Because people will not feel any better during the
Yes,
day.
yes.
In fact, often feel tired during the day, but because they've got these biases and changed thinking around sleep, they go, oh, I'm tired because I'm not sleeping well enough. So I
Yes.
better add in another medication because my sleep's still not right. And they're just a vicious cycle of
Interesting.
medication and tiredness and still, not getting the respite they want
Yes.
from the day. Again, whereas taking a more holistic approach, if they were able to get support for their mental health during the day,
Yes.
or had some good stress management strategies, or were able to look after themselves in a
Better
self-care,
one.
nurturing
Yeah.
sort of sense, they won't be looking for sleep to be that respite
Exactly.
from the day in the same way.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. So, what about sleep apnea? I mean, that's probably one of the more life-threatening sleep disorders. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the most.
Depends on dying from what.
Yes.
So in the longer term, sleep apnea is associated with cardiovascular disease and adverse cardiovascular outcomes. But other conditions like narcolepsy or shift work disorder in the short term can cause significant problems with, say, accidents and work-related
right.
accidents.
So maybe just tell the audience what sleep apnea is.
So all of us, when we go to sleep, have relaxation of our muscles, in part so that we're not moving around too much and we're not acting out our dreams. And a particularly vulnerable part is our upper airway.
Right.
So part of speaking as humans is we've evolved a muscular segment in
Yes.
our airway at the back of the tongue. And so we can move that part of the airway to make different vocal noises to
Yes.
speak. But that part, because it's all muscles, when we go to sleep at night and we lay down, those muscles relax, and it's a vulnerable part that can become narrow. Now, people who are more prone to get even more narrowing are people who are overweight.
Overweight,
That's
yes.
one stereotype.
Yes.
But in actual fact, a lot of the risk of sleep apnea is to do with skull shape.
Oh.
So it's people who either have a slightly smaller, sort of narrower, shorter lower jaw, and that can go with a facial profile that's a narrower, more petite sort of facial profile.
Interesting.
Get sleep apnea too, because the back of the tongue's going to be positioned a bit closer to the back of the airway.
Yes. So physiologically, it's just the way it is.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
just the way it is. So we call that obstructive sleep apnea, where the upper airway becomes obstructed
Yes.
when people are asleep.
Interesting.
And when that occurs, essentially it sets off a sequence of events. The brain senses, hey, difficult to breathe, sets off the alarm bells, pulls people up to a lighter sleep, surges
Yes.
their blood pressure, puts up their heart rate, sends an adrenaline surge
Goodness.
through the body. So that's all those adverse cardiovascular and metabolic effects
Yeah.
that occur from that. And it's also the repeated sleep disruption, which can occur tens of times per hour,
Yes.
can just make people feel exhausted during the
Totally. So
day.
they'll be waking up feeling terrible.
So they feel terrible through the day. So that's the sort of typical things of sleep apnea. So yes, have the stereotype of people who are overweight
Yes.
that's going to have sleep apnea. But also skinny people get sleep apnea too, and think of that in terms of skull shape.
Yes.
One way of picking that is people who are familiar with dentistry pick that.
Yes,
So people
yes.
who've got an overbite, dental crowding. The dentist says, I can't get my instruments in because your tongue gets in the way. Think
Yeah.
sleep apnea.
Oh, that's interesting. And so typically is that treated with a oxygen mask at night?
So it depends. So certainly at the severe end of the spectrum,
Yes.
we'll use an air pressure device.
Yes.
So that's called CPAP. So it stands for continuous positive airway pressure. So it doesn't have to be oxygen. In fact, it's not oxygen. It's
Yes.
just air pressure. Because if you can get a positive pressure in the back of the airway, then the muscles don't relax and close over and the airway's held open.
Okay. Interesting.
We do use some other treatments. So we use dental appliances.
Yes.
So one type's called a mandibular advancement splint. The mandible's the lower jaw.
Yeah.
Because that'll hold the lower jaw forward, bring the tongue away from the back of the airway and
Sort of
create more
from blow
space
back, yeah.
in the back of the airway.
Interesting. And what about, let's talk about the other disorders now. What about restless legs? Tell us about that.
So restless legs is a sense when often people are sitting still or immobile, or when they first go to bed at night, of just this irresistible urge to move their legs.
I've had that before.
Right. So most women have experienced it often in pregnancy.
Yes.
Because one of the things that
it's like an agitation. It's like, got to move.
Right. So one of the things that triggers it is low iron stores or the body mobilising iron. So one state where you're mobilising a lot of iron is pregnancy, particularly third trimester when sucking out all that iron to feed the baby who's growing rapidly. So most women have got a bit of it during pregnancy.
Okay.
And it's not uncommon for people to get it occasionally, which is troublesome because that's about 1 in 6 of the population will have restless legs, on and off, whereas about 2 to 3 in 1,000 get very severe restless legs every single day that drives them totally bananas. And so those 2 or 3 in 1,000 get told by the 1 in 6, oh yeah, I had that thing. It was no big deal,
Yes.
Just get over it. Take a couple of magnesium tablets. You'll be right. It'll all be fine.
Yes.
And so restless legs comes in a grade of severities, and there's definitely that severe end of the spectrum, more that end up in my office, who will need medication despite their best efforts and lifestyle factors. Whereas people who get it infrequently or intermittently, magnesium can be a really good way of managing it. Hot bath, massage, making sure your iron stores are adequate and you're not low in iron. Stress management. It's not caused by stress, but modulated by stress.
Okay.
So when we're more stressed, the symptoms are more likely to come out.
Interesting. That's interesting. So it's purely, it sounds like nutritionally based.
Think of it as there's dopamine in the brain. So the problem is it's a dopamine transport problem in parts of the brain.
Okay.
But the interaction is that to make dopamine in that part of the brain, you need iron as one of the precursors.
Understand.
So that's where the iron story comes in.
Interesting. And what about narcolepsy?
So narcolepsy gets a bit of a bad rap in some respects.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, it's become more of a term for someone who will fall asleep everywhere. If you look in the Urban Dictionary now, and there's been narcolepsy featured on The Simpsons, there's narcolepsy characters in Hollywood movies like Juice Bigelow is one famous one. Essentially, it's, the character is prone to falling asleep everywhere, and or they get a sudden surprise, they collapse to the ground and fall asleep, sort of falling asleep in the soup. Now, I don't see anyone with narcolepsy who actually does that. And so that's a real issue because narcolepsy is rare, but not as rare as we think. So about 3 in 10,000 people have narcolepsy.
Okay.
And unfortunately, they've had an autoimmune condition that's totally destroyed nerve cells in their brain that make a chemical called orexin. And orexin's really important in helping us stay awake and maintaining the balance between wake and sleep. So if you're missing orexin, 1, you have trouble staying awake, and 2, you spend a lot of time in this boundary of wake and sleep. If you're awake, you'll easily fall asleep, but then you'll wake up again.
Yes.
And at night time, if you're asleep, you'll easily wake up
again.
And you'll get weird half awake, half asleep stuff in between, like sleep paralysis, hypnopompic hallucinations, there's visual imagery around sleep onset. So that sort of very unfortunate group of people who are the 3 in 10,000.
Yes.
Sometimes their condition's made fun of in some respects because
schools.
There's this, schools and other things, kids joking, you're narcoleptic, look at you fall asleep everywhere. And so there's the sort of narcolepsy we think of, which is the genuine neurological condition.
Yeah.
And then there's the sort of the Hollywood narcolepsy, which is or the Urban Dictionary narcolepsy, which is your mate who's always going to be sleepy all the time.
Yeah.
That ain't narcolepsy necessarily.
So how do you treat that?
So because it's a lifelong condition with a deficiency of this neurotransmitter orexin, unfortunately, we need to use medications to support wakefulness to treat that.
Okay.
So a medication to help people stay more awake.
Understand.
Now, the perfect treatment going forward in the future would be to replace orexin, and there's certainly work going on, and hopefully in the future that's how we'll manage it, is by replacing that.
Awesome. Talk to us about snoring. Causes snoring and is not necessarily dangerous, but is there Is there something wrong with people who snore? Is it? Yeah.
As a sometimes snorer myself, of course there's nothing wrong with people who snore. So snoring overlaps with sleep apnea, and in fact doesn't overlap, it's the same thing.
Yes.
So think of it as a spectrum.
Okay.
So again, you've got that vulnerable upper airway segment. If it narrows a little bit, it's like a narrowing in a river. So if you watch a river flow, the flow is smooth, and then there's a narrowing in the river and you get these turbulent eddies and currents
Understand.
in it. So the upper airway is the same.
Describe it.
You get this minor narrowing of the airway, you get turbulent airflow, which then sets up a vibration of other structures in the upper airway.
Yes.
And that makes a snoring
And
noise.
you just get a nudge and then you snore. Stop.
Right.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, you get a nudge, the muscles contract, and then the airway opens up again. And so it's just how narrow the airway gets. If it's a little bit narrow, you get turbulent airflow and snoring.
Yep.
Narrows a little bit more, it's a sleep apnea.
Okay.
So it's all
Yes.
a continuum of the same thing. But snoring's pretty normal. And it's so interesting how culturally different cultural groups think about snoring. So in Western society, we're very much the princess and the pea about our bedroom environment. So that snoring noise must be banished from my room.
Yeah.
That's got to stop. Whereas I do a lot of work in India, and in India, I can't remember the saying in Hindi, but essentially the essence of it is if there's snoring in the household, then all is good. And so it's seen as a sign of comfort and prosperity. And so when I work in India, people are like, well, why do you see all these people with snoring? Why are they concerned about this? This is a positive thing to be celebrated.
I'm with Indians.
Yeah. So it is a bit, it's how we conceptualise it often.
Well, I guess it's telling that you're in a deep sleep, really, in a sense, isn't it?
Right. So that's their take on it. If everyone's relaxed enough that they can be deeply asleep and snoring,
it's a good thing.
Life is good.
So what about the movement disorders? So sleepwalking, sleep talking, that's classified as a disorder as well. But what causes that?
So it's actually common. So, anyone who's had young kids knows that occasionally they'll get night terrors or talk or walk during the night. But it's actually common in adults. So about 2 in 100 adults will still regularly sleepwalk or sleep talk.
Goodness.
And so a common time for me to see...
It's a freaky thing to see, by the way.
Right. So a common time for me to see people is like someone I saw today. So a woman in her mid-20s, starting to cohabitate with a partner. And it was always something a family just understood and no big deal.
Yes.
But now you start to live with a partner and it's regularly disturbing their sleep, which then makes the person who's doing it a little more anxious about it, which then guarantees it's going to happen more.
Oh, goodness.
And it all just crescendos and increases.
Snowball. Yeah.
So one of the things that doesn't cause it but contributes to it is stress. So essentially think of sleepwalking or sleep talking. You need to have a main part of the brain or the cortex deeply asleep and then the fight, flight, vigilance part of the brain active. And so you've got the right circumstances for that is a young, healthy, deep sleeper who's somewhat anxious about something.
Right.
Because then you get that automatic, primitive fight-flight part of the brain behaving like it's awake, whilst the cortex, consciousness, social filters being asleep.
Yeah.
And that's what leads to these behaviours. So you're leaping out of bed, you're yelling, you're screaming, you're going to the fridge and uncontrollably eating things. These automatic type of primitive behaviours. The reptilian type of brain is awake and unfiltered.
Well, it can be so dangerous as well.
Right. It's uncommon, though, for people to be putting themselves at harm. That is really uncommon.
Okay.
But it's more that they may injure themselves, throwing themselves out of bed, or often more commonly distressing for the bed partner.
Yes.
And so if it's more something people are prone to, but they recognise during periods of stress, it increases in intensity. Again, that's another condition. I'll really focus on stress management as a way of keeping things at bay.
Yeah, interesting. And are any of these sleep disorders hereditary?
So to some extent, yes.
Okay.
So there's very few sleep disorders that are if you think about inheritance as being a 50% chance of each child getting it, whereas if we think of something where people within a certain family are at a higher risk than the background community of getting it, then a lot of them are I like
Okay.
that. For example, I said narcolepsy is a 3 in 10,000
Yes.
condition, but parents of one child with narcolepsy have about a 1 in 50 chance of having another child with narcolepsy.
Okay.
So more common than the background population, but not a 1 in 2.
Now, talk to us about shift workers. Like, is it true that you get more quality sleep if you're sleeping before midnight? Like, if you fall asleep before midnight, is that a myth?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Another myth.
It's another one. I love this one. So people quote this to me every week.
Yeah.
It's actually a 16th century saying
Okay.
from puritanical England.
Yes.
When we believed the world was flat.
Yes. Yes.
We didn't know that the brain was active during sleep.
Yeah.
We had a whole range of other beliefs. We used leeches for, bloodletting to fix a whole lot of medical things. And so there's no other area of medicine where people ask me, come into my office and say, well, this 500-year-old saying
Yes.
and thing, is that how I should be managing my condition? No, it's total rubbish.
No. Okay.
And it's really a societal belief around sleep that because what people used to do was when the sun went down, there's no artificial lighting, sun went down, you went to bed. So you'd sleep for 3 or 4 hours.
Yes.
And because you were tired from the day, exactly like the way we sleep, the first 3 or 4 hours feels deeper. The experience is that it feels deeper. And then it's normal to wake 3 or 4 hours into the night and reset, go to the bathroom. And so people would wake after 3 or 4 hours and then be awake for an hour or two during the night and then doze until the sun came up. And so that led to that saying, an hour of sleep before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight because it just felt
better.
Deeper. Yeah. So,
Okay.
so that's where people put these value judgments on it.
Yes.
Felt better. Whereas in actual fact, there was just more, think of it as there was more unawareness in that first half of the night, which doesn't mean better or worse. It just means different. There's more unawareness.
So if you get home from a party and you fall asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning and wake up 9 o'clock the next day, it's all good.
Right.
Still fine.
And there's plenty of people that are eveningness types whose natural preference isn't to go to bed till 12, 1 and wait till 8 or 9. And if we let them match their social time to their biological preference, that's when they perform at their best.
Okay.
So if we tried to put a square peg in a round hole and make them go to bed at 9 p.m. and wake up at 6 a.m., they'd always function poorly because they'd have trouble getting to sleep at the start of the night and they'd feel heavy-headed and having trouble getting going in the morning.
Right. Interesting. What about the value of siestas or napping?
Yeah, I love napping. So that's my secret superpower.
Okay.
Is napping.
Well, how long do you nap for?
Oh, I've got a range of naps.
Okay.
A range of naps. I can do, if I've got 3 train stations before I get home, I can usually fit a very brief micro nap in.
That's good. That's a skill.
Right. That's what I say. It's my secret superpower.
That's awesome.
But on a Saturday afternoon, I can do an hour nap on the couch as well.
That's awesome.
So
have you always been able to do that though?
Not always, but I must admit, so partly modelling behaviour. When I grew up, so my father had a habit of sitting in his chair after lunch and having a nap for half an hour because he often had to work in the evenings. Totally rational way of approaching sleep and managing sleep. Now, where it fits for me is good sleepers, going back to this good sleepers, bad sleepers.
Yes.
Good sleepers have what I call a fluid way of thinking about sleep.
Okay, yes.
Wherever, whenever, anytime, any circumstances.
Yes.
Napping's, to be able to nap, you've got to have that fluidity. Yeah. Opportunity arises. I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to take it.
That's my husband. He can sleep anywhere at any time.
Right. Whereas someone who's got that rigidity of thinking about sleep will be, well, I couldn't nap because to go to sleep, I've got to be in this place and it's got to be these circumstances. I've got to have these conditions. Right. It's not going to happen for them.
Yes.
So often I'm trying to, and also think of napping as an advanced skill.
Yes.
If you're not comfortable in the day stopping and being still, you're no chance of napping.
Yes.
So you've first got to be comfortable with that skill of stopping and being still.
You're more likely to nap comfortably.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. That's awesome. Now, what about people who listen to music or podcasts or any educational or audio books like during sleep time or when they're about to go to sleep? Will they? Is it likely that they're able to retain some information that they've heard? Or
so the jury's out on that. And in part, the reason I say it's out, because in a truly artificial experimental design, you can show changes in retention with that sort of experiment.
Oh.
So that you get someone to read something and then get them to have a certain amount of particular types of sleep. You may show better retention than if you prevent certain types of sleep. Now, how does that translate to people, living in the wild, in the real world, where we sometimes sleep better, sometimes worse? That's the part when people haven't really been able to show a significant difference. And so that's why I say the jury's out.
Okay.
If we control things very tightly, yes, there's some impacts on different stages in sleep on learning, but once we put it in the real world and there's all these other variables, does that fade away? Is it such a small difference that it doesn't matter? We don't know.
Okay.
Really.
Interesting. Now, what about dreams? I rarely dream, and if I do, I might wake up and think I've had a dream, and I might remember snippets of it. But my husband has the most vivid dreams, and he can recall them like in minute detail. So, talk to me about like dreams and the recollection, and why is it that some people can recall and others can't?
Right. So, a nice description of the variability from person to person.
Yes.
So, some people have vivid dream recollection.
Yep.
Some people don't.
Yep. Okay.
For everybody, it varies a bit across life. There's some phases in life where people may feel like they're a bit more aware of dreams and other phases where they're not.
Yes.
We don't really know why.
Okay.
So some people do seem to recall dreams more than others.
Yep.
There is an association though that's not, it's not strong, but it's there.
Yes.
Of how intense and how vivid the dreams are, matching with where someone's sitting in a sympathetic nervous system activity level.
Right.
So at one extreme, think the person with PTSD.
Yes.
So post-traumatic stress disorder, high levels of adrenaline drive because of that perceived threat. So one of the problems is of nightmares, vivid dreams, these are recurring visual imagery. So that's sort of one end of the extreme.
Okay.
But at the less extreme end, if somebody, let's just say, use you as an example, your normal state is you barely recall much about your dreams. Current circumstances are pretty challenging, and if you found over the next few weeks you were getting more dreams and they were more vivid and you recalled more about them, for me that would be a reflection of where your underlying sympathetic nervous system activity was sitting, that it's just trending up from your long-term average and therefore giving you a bit more dream recollection. So within an individual, you can often track that if there's a change in their characteristics. And medications also change that. So very typically the antidepressants, anti-anxieties like SSRIs, SNRIs will often change dream recollection as well and make dreams more prominent, or people have greater recollection of dreams.
Interesting. That is interesting. So in your opinion, it's obviously, just in your opinion, do you think having good quality sleep leads to greater health and longevity overall?
Yes. So and my reason for being a little reserved about that is come back to how you define good quality sleep. So in essence, yes, I want people to have prioritised sleep.
Yes.
So really see sleep as one of the key pillars of health, equally important as with nutrition and physical exercise. So see sleep as being important. But the delicate balance is I want people to respect sleep, set aside the space and adequate opportunity for it, but then step back and be, okay, I've set aside the space. Whatever happens in that space,
It happens.
Whatever happens, happens.
Yes.
As long as I've set aside the space and commit to when I enter sleep, I'm going to be in the right frame of mind. I'm going to be sort of ready physically and mentally for sleep. That's really what I want. So I want respect about sleep, but then ambivalence about what happens once you've set aside that space for sleep. And that's the tricky balance.
Yes.
So if I dial up too much for people, you must sleep well. This is the language I often see in the professional athlete sort of area, or the amateur athletes who are really trying to train area. Okay, you must get this amount of sleep to ensure optimal performance. We can't make sleep come.
No.
So if you tell someone you have to make sleep come, guaranteed way to make them anxious about sleep.
Exactly.
Which is much more than, so I don't want to be telling people, right, a key for you for health is you must get good sleep, because that's just going to guarantee they're not going to get good sleep.
Exactly.
And I see it in letters I get sent from other medical specialists who've referred people to me, is like, well, I've told them that they must get good sleep to ensure good health. I was like, yeah, okay. So that's some sleep anxiety I'm going to have to unwind here.
Exactly.
So yes, sleep is absolutely important and should be seen as a pillar of maintaining good health. But think of it as create the right opportunity and the right conditions for sleep, and then step back and trust that your brain and body will take the sleep they need.
Yes.
And how much sleep your brain and body need is going to vary on a day-to-day basis.
Totally.
It's not going to be uniform, the same every day.
Yeah, interesting. So I got back from Dubai a couple of weeks ago, and it's the first time ever that I took a melatonin tablet because I didn't sleep at all on the flight back. And it was like 14 hours, and I came back and had things to do. And sometime in the afternoon, I thought I'd take a melatonin tablet and see what it does. And I was expecting to feel like knocked out or wiped out pretty quick, but it actually didn't do that at all. It took a little while, but then I probably slept for about 5 or 6 hours and got up again. But yeah, I mean, what's your thought? What's your opinion on people taking melatonin? Because it's a natural hormone, right? So what's your opinion on that?
A natural hormone that changes neurotransmitters in the brain. So let me debunk some of that natural hormone. So where we used to get melatonin from is from grinding up cows' brains.
Right.
So just envisage this natural hormone as I'm taking some ground up cow's brain that's going to alter neurotransmitters in my brain. So that's not as natural as you.
Far from natural.
Right.
Well, that's what we're taught.
So then, yes, melatonin is something our own bodies produce.
Yes.
And essentially, when it gets dark and we stop sensing light in special sensors in the back of the eye, the pineal gland starts to produce melatonin and our melatonin levels will rise.
Yes.
So yes, we could take chemically manufactured melatonin, much safer than cow's brain melatonin. So chemically manufactured melatonin to artificially increase our melatonin levels to give the body that signal, hey, it's coming up for time for sleep. And so, it's quite safe. That's the sort of safety sort of side. One of the things we like about melatonin, it's quite safe to use. We're not particularly worried in a safety sense. But my caution is, though, if people feel like they're needing, the exception is a short-term thing like you talked about, so jet lag. But if people are feeling on a longer-term basis like they need to self-medicate with melatonin, for me, there's something else you need to be doing. Yeah, something else you need to address. It's not just great, my solution is I'm just going to take melatonin and that's going to fix everything. Yeah, exactly, solve everything.
Love it. I love your thinking. So last question for you. What are your top 3 tips for living longer, stronger, happier, healthier life?
Oh, that's pretty tough. So certainly number one's got to be sleep.
Got to be.
But with that caveat about seeing sleep as a priority and so giving it its adequate respect, but then not being too fussy about what happens. So let's call that number one.
Yes.
Let's call number 2 is just ensuring self-care, self-compassion during the day.
That's nice, yeah.
Because that's got to be a key to sleeping well, is actually looking after yourself.
Totally.
And then number 3 is, because I'm in the medical field, I'm a bit biased about this, but literally paying attention to medical disorders and mental health disorders. So not saying, well, I'm not sleeping well, I'm not feeling well during the day, but my arthritis isn't well controlled, my blood pressure's not well controlled, or my anxiety is not well managed. Actually ensuring those conditions are well managed.
On top of them, yeah.
Because managing our chronic health conditions is actually going to mediate better long-term health.
Yes, understand. Amazing. Amazing talking to you. So tell me, where can people find you if they've got any sleep disorders or want to have a chat?
Yeah, so a few places to find me. So in the sort of more public facing, I'm on social media. So I post something on Facebook every day, Monday through Friday, some article about sleep. I curate different things about sleep.
Excellent.
So you can follow me on Facebook. That's Dr. David Cunnington.
Yes.
Similarly on Instagram, Dr. David Cunnington's my handle on Instagram.
Yes.
And then I'm on Twitter at David Cunnington. I do produce a lot of material about sleep at sleephub.com.au.
Yes.
Including the podcast Sleep Talk that we run as a monthly podcast on sleep.
Yeah.
And then if people are wanting to see me in my professional capacity as a medical specialist, so I consult from Melbourne Sleep Disorders Centre.
Okay.
That's where I consult. And so people can find the website for that. And yes, in these difficult times, there's going to be challenges in terms of running a practice.
Yes.
But we're geared up. We're running virtually, so able to provide consultations across this time.
It's great.
So that if people do need help, we're there.
You've adapted well. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. David Cunnington. It's been great talking to you. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, and I look forward to chatting to you again.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and follow me on our YouTube channel, One Body, One Life, to see more inspirational videos to help you reach optimal wellness and longevity. But until next time, don't forget, you've got to nourish to flourish.